Hello, BookTube. I'm back, and a while ago I mentioned that I want to start making regular AuthorTube videos. It's an offshoot of BookTube, specifically for writers and wannabe writers. And I thought, what better way to inaugurate that I myself, as I mentioned on this channel, my bona fides for making AuthorTube videos at all is that it's my living. It's not a side gig for me. I have no side gigs. That's all I do. That's true for you as well.
That's true for me as well.
You're just right, and we've both done it for a long time. No teaching gigs, no associate professorships, no nothing like that.
Extremely specific kind of writing. Not
book reviewing.
Book reviewing.
One of the only two people left in the country. Who else? Who else has no other source of income? Just that.
Well, there are some people at the Times, a couple people at the Post. There's a few other people, but there's not a lot.
There's not a lot.
Well, there's a lot of people who are general all-purpose freelancers who write
right,
for a bunch of people.
Right. So that if you're a firm in Osaka and you want a long piece of jargon translated into English, they'll take that job.
You should preface every one of these AuthorTube videos by telling people to read the latest release from the Authors Guild, in which they did a huge survey about how much money people make from writing, and it was something like 60% of full-time writers make less than the poverty level or something like that. So before you consider this as an actual career.
Yes, this is not meant as an inducement.
Yeah.
In our case, though, it's a great stroke of luck, the exact same stroke of luck, in that we have an institution looking out for us.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is rare. We are both technically freelancers, but he has the journal and I have the monitors, and there's a relationship there. It's not just, you're no longer, oh, well, maybe we'll give you some work once a year or something like that, and neither am I.
Right.
And that it can be reflected in the financials as well, but most freelancers, oh my God, I hadn't seen that, but I believe it. I absolutely believe it. But I did an AuthorTube video, an AuthorTube newbie tag, a year ago. But you can still do the tag, even though you're never going to make AuthorTube videos. And some of the questions are interesting. We'll see how many of them apply to you.
Okay.
Question number 1, what is your book's pitch? Assuming here that you are writing a book, but you are not. Right. What would your elevator pitch be for the work you have in progress? But we're not that kind of writer.
No.
You do a weekly thing. Although, would you ever write a book? Do you sometimes think about it?
Well, conceivably I could do, something about some critical work about the state of fiction in some capacity.
And didn't you tell me once upon a time that that for all the collected book reviews that I have in the other room, it's tough to get a publisher to bite at that?
I've collected book reviews. I don't see a lot of that unless you're a pretty big name.
Even Kakutani doesn't have one of those.
No,
right?
no.
And
no,
Ron
no.
Charles doesn't.
No.
And so there isn't really there isn't really a title, because we're both deadline writers.
Yeah.
So there's not a word. Although I myself also do other things. I will be writing for NaNoWriMo, for instance, and I'm currently involved with 3 writers, 3 different books, helping, proofreading, cheerleading, 3 wildly different kinds of books. But I'm not actually solely the generator of prose in any of those, so that doesn't count for either. Question number 2, if you were a book, how would you pitch yourself?
Oh, this is, again, referring to the conceivable book. No.
How would Sam pitch himself? A quiet, cerebral work? Sneaks up on you?
Right.
Slim? I don't know if you can tell. He's got the bean on his lap like that. She's being very sedate. I don't know why. I don't know how we'd pitch you as a book.
Well,
We pitch you as a book.
So what I write are just book reviews of new releases, and usually what I do is what's considered like a roundup column. So it's 3 books each, 2 or 3 books each week, and it's just the new releases. So the way you would pitch it is sort of an overview of the world of literary fiction.
Yes, a photo, a thumbnail of that week's,
Yes.
of that month's.
Right. So a book, you would, if you were going to gather that, you would conceivably find all the categories of sorts of books. You would sort of say, like, here are the sorts of books coming out of the debutantes from Brooklyn or something, or here are the books from across the ocean or whatever, or you might do it by theme or something like that, so that it would give you a panorama.
It has cumulative effect. Yours do. Anyway.
Of
you seem to keep a weather eye on
the
that.
State
on the
of literary fiction, across the world. It would be something like that.
I was reading. I'm reading my way through the collected essays of Virginia Woolf, and the early volumes of that aren't essays; they're just book reviews.
When they were just mailing her books,
and the editor, I forget his name, but he had the genius idea to footnote every review, and he doesn't just do footnotes of what the books are, because you need that in old reviews because the books go away, and times and whatnot. But he also goes through her diary and prizes out all mentions of that week and those books. And she mentions in a couple of different entries in her diary, she mentions that got a new box of books from the TLS, and she mentions it reminded me of you, because she says that it's like constantly getting buffeted with choppy waves.
Yes,
because it's one after another and they're not all identical.
Yes, right. That's one way to do it. What's the Cyril Connolly way, or you're just trying to hack out the jungle in order to create civilization?
And remember, don't go native.
Yeah, don't go native.
But he also gave there's a great essay by Cyril Connolly about book reviewing, and he gives one. I love it. I absolutely love it. But one of the pieces of advice that he gives in there is don't praise. It dates you.
Yes, that's right.
And that not only would that rule out half the book reviewing colleagues that we have, but if you like something, that's a legitimate part of your brief as a book reviewer.
He's just being very cynical.
It reminds me of that DJ Taylor piece in the TLS about why we review books, where he just innocently put forward some ideas, and the letters haven't stopped.
Oh, really?
People saying all the same things, saying enough of this highfalutin business. What I want a book review to do in a newspaper is tell me whether or not I should buy the book.
Right.
Instead of he said something that John Leonard always used to say, which is that the point of a book review is for the book reviewer to deepen his knowledge of himself.
Well, I kind of agree. I know it's a tension between the both, but if you're just going to do the first, or you're just sort of saying, thumbs up to this one, you just get so bored so quickly, and you cease to pay attention when you read.
Right.
And you won't be an engaged critic, so you're not.
And you thin out the difference between yourself and anybody on Goodreads or Amazon.
Completely.
That's all
you just become Consumer Reports. So
there's got to be a balance of the two there. It also helps if you build an audience, right? If you build people that know that they trust your judgment.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Oh, question number 3 kind of answers itself at this point. What do you usually write?
Yeah.
Book reviews. Both of us, book reviews. That's you write. You don't write anything else.
In a particular kind, a deadline book review. It's every week, so it's not yeah.
It's not a long ruminative piece. You've done those.
Yes, I've done those. Yeah.
But the regular thing, it's just deadline. Question number 4. What's something you'll never write? Science fiction, perhaps.
Geez, I would probably never write. I would probably never write poetry, but maybe I would write poetry and just never show it to anybody.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I've done that.
I write poetry and never show it to anybody. That's exactly what I do.
I actually have done that.
But for public consumption.
For public consumption,
could you ever conceive of writing a Harper-style confessional essay?
I don't have a yen to do that, and I kind of don't like the idea of it. But on the other hand, you don't need any particular expertise to do it, and
no, you don't.
Who knows what kind of financial dire straits I'll get in one day? So I wouldn't rule that out. I don't know. It's a good question.
I bet you'd like to do travel writing.
Yeah, I would love to do travel writing. There's a lot of kinds of things I would like to do. No, it's a good question. Probably more. Anything that requires a hard expertise in something, or like you have to understand economics, or you have to understand politics in some sort of profound way. I would hope I wouldn't write things like that, because I would just be BSing. I hope I wouldn't write punditry, I guess, is one thing I would say.
Yeah, I'd avoid it. It's a soul-crushing endeavor. Question number 5. What's your goal for starting an AuthorTube channel? Jenna, starting an AuthorTube channel. So let's just move right on. Question number 6. What made you want to start writing? Oh, look at the baby.
That's a good question. I don't remember. I was good at it in high school, I think, when you were assigned things. I don't know if I was good at it, but I was more I was excited by it,
And that always helps.
as opposed to everything else I did, which I didn't find exciting. So that's probably why. And then I think I sensed that I probably was good at it, at least better, relative to everyone around me. So then that was exciting. I felt good about myself when I was doing it. I felt hopeful about it. I think that was the reason I started, and then it became more engaged and became a deeper and a more profound endeavor the more.
You were also strongly, unequivocally told that you were really good at it.
In
By a certain person.
but even before that's true, that very much so. But even before I met you in college, I did have good professors who were good as professors, but were also good just because they did the thing.
To spot talent.
Yeah, they did the thing that everyone wants to have done to them at some point, which is to be pulled aside and say, this is the thing for you.
Yes, to have a professor pull you aside, that is crucial. Absolutely crucial. Not enough of them do it. I gather
I imagine.
2020, you'd risk a lawsuit if you didn't do that for everybody.
Yeah.
If word got out.
Yeah. Well,
Then what would it be? Well, who did you pull aside? Was it someone of your same skin color? Was it someone of your same gender or perceived gender?
Or it's that all your professors are adjuncts now, so they don't have
They're
any
all
particular
adjuncts. They don't have any
authority.
loyalty. They hate the school.
Yeah.
That's rogering them left, right, and center. Of course, they're not going to do anything for us. Let's see here. Question number 7. What's your publishing path? Self-published, traditional published, hybrid? Haven't decided yet. Write just for fun.
No, this has an answer. I mean, it's alternative weekly newspapers, which don't exist anymore. But if you are of an age, you will remember that every city of a certain size had a free weekly newspaper that came out obviously every week, and there was a box on the street corners that you would open it up, and it was just there for you to take. So
The Boston Phoenix.
The Boston Phoenix, the Village Voice, whatever. Every city had them, and they still maybe exist in online form a little bit sometimes, but for the most part they're gone because they existed on classified ads. That's how they got their money.
And they were crucial. They were an ideal starting point.
Totally. And I wrote for them, and I wrote for any city that I happened to live in. So the first one I wrote for was it was called Pittsburgh Pulp. It was the secondary Pittsburgh. It wasn't even the main one, because there was one called the Pittsburgh Weekly or something.
Oh my.
But basically I just sent an email. I think I wrote a review on Spec or something like that, and sent an email to the editor who was just desperate for, try to fill out his newspaper every single week and wanted to do book reviews once in a while, and there weren't a lot of people who wanted to be paid $20 for a book review. So he let me write for him, and I wrote for him for a while, and then I moved to other cities and wrote for those people, and I did that for a long time. Until we started Open Letters Monthly, that's where I was writing book reviews.
And that garners momentum, right? Because you go to the next person and you've got... It's like I've said... I don't know if I've ever said it on YouTube, but I've often said to people, it's invaluable to go to a buying editor, even if it's $20, to go to an editor who has money in his hand and say, these other editors liked me.
Yeah.
As opposed to my friends like me.
Well, and then I moved to New York, and I wrote for what was called the New York Press, which was the secondary New York one. But that was that had a real readership, at least compared to most of them, and it was online, and so you sort of felt like you were in the thick of it, and I could do that because I had this background in writing for all these other things.
And Open Letters helped.
Well, that was later. Open Letters came later for me.
Open Letters, we created a literary journal. Me, Sam, and John Cotter created a literary journal and made it good. That's the simplest way to put it.
Well,
we poured prose into it.
Open Letters happened because I was writing for New York Press, and who else was writing for New York Press? Tony DeCopel, who is now a big shot news guy for CBS Morning News.
Oh,
Tony
right.
DeCopel was writing random restaurant reviews for New York Press. We were both in the same issue. He emailed me. We got a coffee, and he said he was at Columbia's J School at the time, and he was running an online literary journal just for experience.
What was it called? The Columbia Journal of American Studies. Online.
Columbia Journal of American Studies. And he said, will you write a review for that? So I wrote something for that, and then Steve wrote something.
You asked me to do it.
Yeah, because he needed people
I
to
hadn't
review
done
it
in forever. I hadn't done it in a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
And I remember that vividly. I was living in South Boston, and I agreed when you called me on something the kids used to call the telephone, and there was no email or I didn't know how to use it very well.
Yeah.
And you suggested it, and I said yes. And when I hung up that day, I remember it vividly. I was on the couch in the front room of that apartment, and I thought, for one of the first times in my life, I thought, can I still do this? What if it's bad? It was on a Gerald Ford book. I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah. So those of you, I think it's gone, but those of you who can access the Wayback Machine, maybe you can find it. But
I have never. I didn't know about the Wayback Machine until just last week. I could not find. I want to find that Gerald Ford review because it's the very first step I did towards returning to book review.
Anyhow, next time you watch CBS Morning News and you see Tony DeCopel
and his hair
looking very good, he's the reason that Steve and I, not looking good, have our
we don't look like Tony. No,
in a dog hair covered room, and they're talking about books to you guys. It's because of Tony.
That's true, because he was hungry for book reviewers.
And
wow.
Tony is because of alternative free presses, which don't exist anymore either.
And we should plug Tony's book.
And
right?
Tony wrote a memoir.
He wrote a fantastic memoir.
Yeah.
That it's on Amazon. It's well worth your time. It's an amazing book. Wow, an origin story.
There you
Who
go.
would have thought it?
An
Good
actual
Lord.
story.
All right. Let's see here. Question number 8. Oh, God. What content do you bring to the AuthorTube table? Can you hack it on AuthorTube?
No.
What can you offer?
That was a good story, but that's my only story.
It's unfortunate.
So
Yes.
it's
Not a whole lot of stories. It's just, what are you doing now? What are you working on now? What's your thing this week?
I don't know.
Yeah, and AuthorTube isn't involved in book reviewing. It's all about writing fiction, or maybe a little nonfiction.
That's good. That's much more interesting.
One of the things that I am helping to write in 2020 is a novel, and the other two are nonfiction. So I'm getting a little exercise on both sides, which is great.
If you were Virginia Woolf, you would be able to talk about sort of the psychic differences of those things. But you're you, so it's exactly the same.
For me, it's exactly the same. Oh, God, help us. No, I don't do it. He's the deep end of the pool. I don't do anything like that at all. And I laugh at it. I don't believe any of it at all. Except you make it convincing. When you do a deep dive, good Lord, the things you can do to a book in 300 words, half our contemporaries can't do in 1,000 words.
Nice of you to say. Leonard Woolf used to say that he could tell what Virginia Woolf had been writing, whether it had been working on a novel or book reviews, by how flushed her face was when she came to lunch. So if she was really worked up, she had been working on fiction. If she was sort of much more demure, then she had been doing nonfiction, in a slightly deeper form, even though she brought it as deep as he could possibly.
I think it's hilarious in those prized out diary entries. Sometimes you see her savaging the book that she wrote a balanced review of.
Yes.
She can't do that.
She must have been totally exasperated by these things that she's being said.
But no, one of the nonfiction things that I'm working on is a memoir / fitness guide that is going to be very good. It's going to be very good. Its author has no idea how eloquent he is. Let's see here. And just as a side note, on AuthorTube, those of you on AuthorTube, you hear all the time. You hear from Stephen King, for instance, but a whole bunch of other people too. You hear one of the most important things about being a writer is reading. I have made this point many times, and I don't know if you've noticed in this video, but we both worship at the altar of Virginia Woolf. So that's important, So if you're wondering, okay, you hear writers all the time say I should read as well as write, and you're wondering who you should read.
It's not a bad start.
It's not a bad start. No, there's a lot there. Although I got an email from a viewer of mine just the other day. I think it was yesterday. I'm always praising Taylor Genji on this channel, and God bless him. One of my Donna Huguenots went out and tried Genji. I forget how far he said he got into it, but he wrote me a desperate email saying, I know I'm supposed to like this, but what is this? I can't get into it at all. Yeah. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to... How long did it take you to love the book? One whole translation?
Oh, no, I loved it right away, but it's, you have to have a lot of time, and it goes very slow, and it works its way around you, and it builds itself up
and it rests on a lot of alien assumptions about narrative.
Yeah. You
have to be willing to let go of a lot of those to sort of get it. I'll make a video on it. A very long video.
I know, it's so different than everything.
But not impenetrable, right? It's not hopeless.
It's different, but it's also has a lot of, I think, it's not hopeless, definitely not. but but it's big and it's daunting. So
It's big and it's daunting.
nothing to be ashamed
And it
of.
doesn't do what you expect.
No.
You expect it to have an arc, a denouement,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have any of that.
No, it just keeps going.
It doesn't want to have any of that.
No.
Anyway, let's see here. Where are we? Question number 9. What's your biggest writing struggle?
That's a good question.
And let's leave out pragmatic stuff like just meeting deadlines.
Yes.
Just leave it to writing.
Okay, the biggest writing struggle is the start, is starting the thing, is knowing where to start, because usually you can't actually start at the start. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you get the perfect sort of I know exactly what my first sentence is. Everything flows from that, and then it feels very downhill skiing if you do that. But usually
It's amazing how helpful that opening is.
Usually you don't have the opening, or often you don't have the opening when you start. So then you have to figure out how to start. Either you start in the middle, or you give yourself a placeholder opening, or you have something that might be the opening, and then you have to go back and tweak it. It's very unsure, and it's very unclear, and it doesn't always present itself until you've finished, or you're in revision or something. You haven't even, you can write an entire thing, but then still feel, what is tying this together? What is my thread here? What is making this cohere? What is making it different than just a lot of observations that are sort of lined up in a row? Is there something, am I making some sort of point here? And then you have to continue, and you have to revise in the hopes that you will find the crux of what you're trying to say, and then that will lead you back to the beginning. So it's a very inverted process, which is not the way you would expect it to be. It's illogical in a certain way, where you start not at the start. You somehow have to start at the end, where you are reaching your conclusion, and then move backwards in order to make it look like every step was leading you towards that conclusion.
And when you get to that perfect starter, you always recognize it, right?
Yes.
It jumps right out, you know.
Yes, not always, but very, very often. Usually you have the line, or the idea, or the opening paragraph, or the angle. I guess we're talking about angles.
Angle, yeah.
Angles of entrance.
Or an axe that splits the wood, the very
Yes.
first stroke that splits the wood and then makes it all easier.
Yes, or something that introduces an idea that you can then keep going back to, that will keep everything tied
Yes.
together. Everything, you have a home base that you can keep returning to.
Because you can't cover everything.
No.
You need an organized idea
exactly.
like that, or the piece will just fall all over the place.
Exactly. Yes, and that's exactly, especially when you're doing reviews in limited count, you have to be sparing, you have to be stinting on what you can actually talk about.
Right.
And so
if you pick an opening that ends up going down a dead alley of something you're not going to talk about, then you need to junk it. You need to get rid of it and start another opening.
Yeah. So starting is difficult, and I suspect that's actually true in most kinds of writing, from a poem to anything. I mean, I guess in a poem you just start with something and you see where it goes, and who knows. But again, I don't know. This is why I throw away my poetry.
Yeah, no, I didn't expect that poets would take such a bare knuckle beating in these videos. Well, I'll say something nice about them next week or something like that.
But I do find, in talking to people who write longer books or write novels, often the first chapter is the thing you do at the end, or you do later on in the book, because it needs to embed what you're going to be doing with the rest of the things. But you can't know that until you've come much farther. So how do you start if not at the start is a weird problem that you have to struggle with.
I used to know a murder mystery author who said that he'd be absolutely lost if he started at chapter 1.
Yeah.
Chapter 1 is the last thing he writes.
Yeah.
Actually, the description, the plot, the process that he described sounded similar to what you're saying. He needed to know what it was, so that he could then lay the traps for it,
right,
and the red herrings for it, and everything. Right. When it comes to writing book reviews, if you want my answer to the question, take everything that Sam just said and reverse it. I know exactly what I want to say from the beginning, and I start with a bad joke or an attack on the author. He's talking about responsible, multi-layered, multifaceted writing. I don't do anything like that. I instead have the classic Steve Donahue trumpets and timpani at the beginning. If I'm on a tear, trumpets and timpani is when I am just having a ball. talking about the subject of the book at the beginning of the piece. And if I'm on a tear, the author will be lucky if I mention him at all. So I just keep going. On and on and on. Remember, we used to do these exhaustive editing sessions for Open Letters Monthly, where it would go through a whole bunch of us that were doing these things. You would do on the shared document, you'd be able to see people's comments. And I'd lost count of how many of my pieces where people would write a comment like at paragraph 10, they say, "Gonna mention the book anytime." Well, that wasn't deadline thing. I a little bit better behaved when I went.
But that's it. But that's also someone like Clive James or James Wolcott. You know, someone who basically think of a great line, just a really funny line or a really catchy line, and of course they're going to start with it because it's going to grab the author. And whatever, then they can get to anything else they need to.
Clive James used to say also that sometimes when he was considering a book review, it might not be the opening, but he would immediately think of a joke, of a quip, and he would tailor the whole thing towards that.
Completely, yeah.
And interviewers used to say, "Well, doesn't that slight the book?" And he'd say, "Well, there'll always be more books."
Yeah,
which is kind of, it's true, but it's kind of cruel if you're an author listening to that.
Yeah, I find it a little foreign. I wouldn't know how to do that because I couldn't tell a joke to save my life. But that's another way to do it.
Every once in a while, it pays off. I wrote. You might not remember. I wrote a book about somebody wrote a biography of President Lincoln's Secretary of War.
Yes.
And it was a furiously angry biography and hated the guy from start to finish. Didn't cut him any slack at all. And I just started mocking that quality in the book all throughout, saying, "This is beautifully written, but good Lord, you can't let this guy up off the mat for a minute." And the author actually liked it. He left a comment on the review saying not only was it the best review he's ever read of a book of his, but he said it was the best review of anything he's ever read. And yet in the review I'm saying, you definitely don't want this to be the only biography of this guy that you ever read. He seemed to get it. Maybe that's what he was doing. But it's a fascinating process you're describing. And I don't know how much of it. Surely some of that applies to writing fiction.
I think it's a similar.
What you're saying is he's saying it's non-linear and it's not particularly logical. You're not building towards something. The one difference I think that would make for AuthorTube is that we're talking about writing under the gun.
Yeah.
Whereas the way that people on AuthorTube do this is to make outlines.
Yeah.
And that's the way you can figure out the flow of things and where your emphasis is going to go. And we don't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So you sort of have to do it sort of with your gut, or whatever you've eaten that's lodged in your gut. I don't know. Let's see here. Question number 10. What is your best writing skill? You're not going to want to say, are you? You're going to want to leave somebody else to say it. Can you toot your own horn?
I don't know. I'm a discerning reader, so my writing skill flows from being a discerning reader, being a perceptive reader. I can describe something that I think is going on in the book. I hope. I don't know. I would ordinarily sound like a stereotypical Jewish mother to say that when it comes to contemporary American fiction, he's the most discerning writer currently working in print. But in addition to being a doting Jewish mother, I also read all the other people who do what you do, and you are the best. So that it's a good call on his part. Let's see here. Worth a subscription to the journal, just for his column. Then let's see here. Okay, then we're finishing up. Or no, the next two we have to choose between question 11 or question 12. Question 11 is if you've been on YouTube for a while, what's your best AuthorTube tip? Ever been on YouTube, except as a guest on my channel. And question number 12 is if you're new to AuthorTube, what is your biggest AuthorTube question? You don't have any questions for these people. You're too busy writing to have questions. We'll just move on to question 13. Are you looking for any new channels to follow? Beta readers? Oh, God help us. No, you're not looking for any of those. And question number 14, which I think is the last one. What are you most excited for during this fresh start on AuthorTube? And you're not, it's not going to be on AuthorTube. But you got to hear us talk about writing. That's something, right? It's fascinating to me to hear. Yeah. I hope there's like you say, most people doing it are people who are doing NaNoWriMo or are writing a novel very quickly.
An ongoing YA novel or something like that.
So that's a really interesting way to do it, although it does make for one particular kind of writing where you just sort of
and one particular set of responses on a video like this.
Yeah.
But
So a little variety here. If you
A little
for
variety,
some
yes.
reason are writing deadline book reviews.
If you want to write deadline book reviews, feel free to let me know. We are both editors at Open Letters Review. It is the continuation of Open Letters Monthly that we've been talking about. Feel free.
We can give you deadlines, and
We can give you deadlines. I will send you books.
arbitrarily demand that you stick to them.
And I don't know, is that any kind of equivalent to the independent alternate papers that you were talking about? What is the equivalent of
I
that
think
now?
it is. Yeah, no, it's the online
Online
stuff.
sites?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
And there are a handful of them, right? There are a handful that have been around for a while.
There are a handful of them. Yeah, there seem to be fewer now than there were 5 years ago, but there are still some. Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's your AuthorTube newbie tag with a different author. Unfortunately, it's exactly the same kind of stuff. I was making the same kind of apologies in my own video.
Yeah.
It's not. It's we write 800-word deadline prose per week, so it's not quite the same thing. But some of these principles will apply. So let's hope that this was useful to you. But we're going to sign off for now, and see, here's where I want to tease with all the exciting stuff we're going to talk about. We're just going to talk about books and writing. So we're going to sign off and then continue doing this.
Some of these conversations will be repeated
They will
in a
be.
slightly more slurred fashion.
That would be me. I plan on overindulging. Sam doesn't overindulge. But anyway, I'll be back, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.